Hi, it's Dennis Daly. I've posted over 100 excerpts from some of my more than 250 American montage shows that I did in the 1980s and 90s while at UPI Radio. Recently, I embarked on a fresh series of shows, and here's the second half of one of my new American montage interviews. Welcome back. My guest this week is actor Will Hutchins, who since his early days starring in Sugarfoot, he's done just a little bit of everything in the world of entertainment. Before the break, we were talking about great scenes in movies, and Will, I think there's one scene that's my favorite. It's only one word. And when I hear that one word spoken in the movie, I get chills. It's from Citizen Kane.
Oh, wow.
And it's when Agnes Moorehead, as the young Kane's mother, is being told that he's going to be taken away by the lawyer back to Philadelphia. And there's this great scene where the father and the mother and the lawyer are all talking over each other. Now, because Wells was born of radio and he knew people talked over each other, he didn't think there was anything wrong with this. Well, finally, Agnes Moorehead goes to the window, and outside there's, I think it was Sonny Bupp.
Yeah, with his sled.
Was playing with the sled. Agnes Moorehead opens the window, and then the camera shoots from outside, and all she says is, "Charles." And that one word is, am I doing the right thing? Will I ever see you again? Is it too late to back out of this? The emotion in that one word, Charles, just makes my hair stand up when I hear it. But that was Agnes Moorehead.
I just got chills.
Yeah.
You know, Wells was the master. I used to listen to him all the time when I was a kid in the dark with a light on in the hall. And he was so popular that he had to rent an ambulance to get around New York, busy New York, from show to show. He'd get on the set and he'd say, who am I, what's my character? And then he'd go on the air and read it point blank, you know, just from the top for the first time.
Well, the other actor who could do a great cold read and would sometimes be in 3 shows on all 3 networks on one night, and you may know where I'm going with this, who tended to wear socks of different colors that didn't match, was Hans Conried.
Oh, God, yes, jeez. Yeah, well, I grew up, you know, here in L.A., and in those days it was safe. My mom let me take the bus into Hollywood on weekends or sometimes school nights, just go to the radio shows. L.A. was entirely different then. It was safe. Never worried about me. So my debut was on the Burns and Allen show.
Wow.
I got, you could always get a ticket. You could cadge a ticket. No, you have an extra ticket. You could always get a ticket. So and NBC had their mics for the audience reaction and laughter in the aisles, but CBS had them hanging from the ceiling. So I sat right under the mic, and every time Gracie cracked a funny, I'd laugh right up into the mic. The next day I went to school, and all of my pals said, "We heard you on Burns and Allen last night."
Let me throw out a couple of more names of people whom I really wish I had met. And this is a fellow who Jack Benny always said had the most impeccable timing in the world and was a natural actor who married Alice Faye, and that was Phil Harris.
We just did a Phil Harris Alice Faye radio show in Newark.
I would have killed to have met Phil Harris.
Well, I used to go to the Benny radio show, and that was my favorite. And the pre-show was better than the radio show because it was a lot of visual stuff. And Phil Harris would always sing, "That's what I like about the South." But he stood away from the mic, and then he'd lean in. And then when the band was playing, he'd stand back, and then he'd lean in. And that was marvelous. You know, I've heard my producer on Blondie, Joe Conley, my favorite producer ever, swore to me, he was not joking at all, swore to me that Phil Harris was a full-blooded American Native Indian.
Well, you know, his real first name was, of all things, Wanga.
Jeez.
Will Hutchins, let's move on. You were on Sugarfoot for 4 years and then did a few other things. Then you were tapped by Warner Brothers to go overseas and work on a really tough movie to make, and that was called Merrill's Marauders.
Yeah, that was after they decided not to continue with Sugarfoot. They shipped me over to the Philippines to refight World War II. Yeah, right in the middle of the Philippines. And boy, I had dysentery the whole time I was there.
Good heavens.
And I brought all my health. I was the only guy that brought his health foods with him, honey and pills and stuff, and I got sicker than anybody.
Then you went on the road and to Broadway in a great play called Never Too Late. Tell us what it was like, again, to be in front of a live audience with no retakes.
Well, I'd done a lot of theater in college and in small theaters in L.A., but working with Nancy Carroll, she's the first woman to ever sing and dance in sound movies, to do both. And she just lit up the stage. I didn't realize how great she was because she was just a great person. But one night we were opening in Washington, D.C., and a buddy of mine from college, UCLA, came backstage, and I thought he was going to give me all kinds of accolades. And all he did was talk about how great Nancy Carroll was. And that was one of the last things she ever did. So, and she liked me, and that was a great honor that she liked me.
Now, Will, you worked in 2 movies with a superstar. What was it like to spend that much time with Elvis?
I should write a book about it because I could talk all day and night about him.
Fill us in.
Of all the people I ever worked with, he was my favorite, and he was about the most talented, too, even though his scripts weren't always that great.
Well, you know, Ed Sullivan said Elvis was the sweetest young man who ever performed on his show.
He was so thoughtful to everybody. It was like a party. It would last 5 weeks. He was the host, and he went around making sure everybody was having a good time. And we had so much fun together on Clambake that we made up a lot of the gags. And the director let us get away with it because his dad used to work with the Marx Brothers. And his dad told him that the Marx Brothers were such wild creatures on the MGM lot, they had to get a cage and capture them and put them in the cage until they got all 3 rounded up, and then they could go on with the movie. So this director, Arthur Nadell, let us do a lot of stuff that wasn't in the script, and it was sheer joy. And then I heard a few years ago from Red West, one of Elvis's cronies, that Elvis's 2 favorite sidekicks were Bill Bixby and me. And Elvis wanted to make one more crazy, crazy movie like Clambake, and he wanted me to be a sidekick one more time. But, of course, it never panned out.
You can only imagine. Then you worked with Jack Nicholson.
Yes, I did. In fact, I got top billing because I was the only, in those days, I was the only one who had any kind of a name. I was considered bankable, but piggy bankable, I guess. It's called The Shooting, and we shot up at Kanab, Utah. We used a set of the Sergeant's 3. We used that set. And mostly we just used the terrain. And we shot it in 3 weeks, and we would have shot it in 2, but it rained, and we had to keep, we shot the picture in sequence, starting from page 1 and going right through, unlike any other movie I've ever worked on or heard about. And we had to keep the terrain matching. So 1 week we had to just take off until it all dried out, else we would have done it in 2 weeks.
I don't know what there is about Kanab, Utah, but I remember one episode of Sam Spade, Detective, with Howard Duff talking to his secretary, Effie, telling her, I don't want you to ever go back to Kanab, Utah again.
Oh, I know one thing. My buddy was up there, and he was about the only bachelor, and he started courting one of the locals, and he had that sheriff following them wherever they went. He couldn't get away with a thing.
So after that Western, which some people would describe as being adequate, you get tapped to go back to television. You did 2 more series. One of them, and I want to ask about, is Blondie.
Yeah.
And in a previous long-running series, Arthur Lake had played Dagwood. Were people making comparisons?
No, not. I couldn't get my hair. They couldn't get my hair to stick up. Like in the funny papers. They dyed my hair black. There goes my hair again. And it didn't look good at all. I just didn't look good with black hair, so they let me just have my regular hairdo and hair comb.
And then you co-starred in a show that I thought should have gotten better reviews. That was Hey Landlord.
Well, I think I was miscast in that. I don't think that Belson and Marshall was their first series that they did, and everything else they did after that was a big hit. And they came out of the Dick Van Dyke Show. And I could just tell these guys didn't, I didn't think Sheldon Leonard wanted me. But I guess NBC did, because I'd made some pretty darn good pilots that didn't sell. One was with Paul Lynde called Howie, which I thought was tremendous. And then another one called Legal, shot over at Paramount, my favorite studio. and that was a real funny slapstick thing.
Funny you should bring up Paramount. I have a friend who's now retired from Paramount. He was a longtime wiring and lighting guy on the set, Fred Townsend.
Oh, yeah.
And I have a much younger friend who is working on the Paramount lot as a researcher. The idea I get from both of them is that unlike many of the other studios, there was kind of a warm feeling of family at Paramount that you didn't see anywhere else in Hollywood.
Yeah, it has great... in fact, we used the Paramount Western Street when I did the Gunsmoke. We used that street, across the street over there. Anyhow, it just got such great vibes. And my hero growing up was Harold Lloyd, and he made a lot of movies there at Paramount. And I got to do a lot of street stuff in that pilot, Legal Eagle. And we had a wonderful director, Larry Dobkin, who came out of radio.
Oh, my Lord.
Wonderful director. And he's the only director I ever saw that talked to the extras before the shot. We did a big street scene that caused you had to have a lot of coordination with the cars and crossing the street and the people running around. And he talked to everybody and all the extras. He said, you're stars in this movie just as much as anybody else, because you're a star in your own life, and you got to think of yourself that way, not as an extra, but as a single human being.
Well, that reminds me a lot of Clark Gable, who at MGM and Selznick would talk to the technicians. And I know that Louis B. Mayer thought there should be a class system, and he would really clamp down on Gable for being chummy and eating with the technicians.
I call it caste system.
Caste, yes, not class.
That's all. I write a column, and one of my columns was I give several examples of this snootiness, and you think somebody's your pal, and they're not your pal, and all the snootiness and everything. I use a lot of examples. Then I said, invent a game called Hollywood. Make chess look like tiddlywinks. I don't think anybody could ever figure out the rules. I sure couldn't.
You bring up an interesting point there, Will, and somebody may have done it, but it would be fun to see all those unsold pilots released in a DVD collection.
I think it's a great idea, and occasionally they'll call me up and say, can we show a scene from your unsold pilot? Take me to your leader. And I'll say, sure, why not? And then they send me a check.
Now, you also have some great stories about working on a project with a lovely actress who's still around making appearances, Tippi Hedren.
Back in 1969 it was, the year that we walked on the moon. I went with her and her husband, Noel Marshall, to Africa, where she made a movie in Rhodesia, in South Africa both. And while she was making the movie, Noel and I rented a Fiat and went all over the countries down there, Zimbabwe and Botswana and all that. We just had a wonderful time with the animals and taking movies. And then she fell in love with wild animals. And she just had an affinity to all these great animals that were working on the movie or just surrounding the area. And so a few years later, she and Noel bought their property in Acton, California, made it a game preserve for wild animals. So
Tippi Hedren's legendary work she has done to protect animals came from that trip to Africa.
Yeah, and they built their own little compound. His sons helped them, and they made up a lake, and they made the houses. And originally it was called Lions, Lions, and More Lions. And I had a part in it. I had a few lines, but my lines were cut out. So with me, it wasn't lines. It was in lines, and less lines. And I had one scene where I'm in a boat, rowboat, and a Siberian tiger, a jaguar, and a black panther jump into my boat. They're all part of the compound, and they're well fed, luckily. I just sat perfectly still, and I wasn't scared. And they were more interested in the balance, how everything was unbalanced being in that boat. So they finally all jumped off. And they cut that scene out. That would have been a great scene. I wish I had the footage of that.
Absolutely. And so, Will, after those projects, when I look at your biographical information, suddenly your career makes a strange turn and you head for Australia. How did that come about?
Well, my agent never wrote, never called, so I started working in circuses. And then I formed a clown troupe for the city of L.A. That was the best job I ever had. We put on clown shows all over L.A. for all different conditions: libraries, parks, senior citizens, hospitals, We could do it anywhere. No admission, of course. Free. The city of L.A. paid us our wages, and that was the best job I ever had. I was able to really create stuff. So we did that for about 5 years, and I'd been offered a job over in Australia before that, and I called them up and said, "You still want me over there?" So I went over there and worked in Ashton Circus, which at the time was the world's oldest family-operated circus. And I got to see Australia several times over, unlike any other tourist would ever get to see it. And I stayed there for 3 years. They paid me very well, much better than you could get paid in this country. And they were paying 14% interest in the banks then. So I had a lot of money saved up, and I went all over. I went to one of the roustabouts told me Sri Lanka was great. So I went there, and I went to Singapore and India, and then I went back to Europe where I'd been in the Army and relived old days. And then I ran out of money, so I came home, and Babs was waiting for me, and we weren't hitched then, but we've been together ever since.
Well, you've had an amazing career, Will, and...
You know who's had an amazing career? Woody Allen. Did you see that documentary on him? Oh, at the end, it's 2 parts, you know, and at the end he says, "I had a lot of dreams when I was a kid, and I've realized every one of them." Boy, how fortunate is that?
Will, what haven't you done that you would have liked to have done?
Oh, one of the things he said, he wanted to be a jazz clarinet player, and he got to be one. Well, I always wanted to be a jazz alto sax player. Never got that way. I wanted to be a baggy pants comedian in burlesque, because when I was a kid, burlesque ran rampant downtown L.A., and I'd go down there every weekend with my buddies. Originally, it was to see the gals, of course, but after a while, we just fell in love with all those great baggy pants comedians. Geez, they were great.
And a huge number of them eventually became major stars in television.
Yeah, because... ask me what's the secret to my talent.
Okay, I'll put it as a formal question. Will Hutchins, what is the secret of your
timing.
Talent?
They all had that great timing.
You were talking there for a moment about recreating old-time radio,
yeah.
and there are fewer and fewer people interested in that. But what was the reaction, particularly from younger people, when they realized that, hey, before the internet, before television, this was entertainment? Yeah,
well, they still have shows that put on tapes from the old days, and they can latch onto those. And you can buy tapes. I've got all the old radio shows down in the basement, listen to them every now and then. But I'm telling you, when I grew up, it was during the Depression. We didn't have television. We had radio at night, and then the movies on Saturday. And it was a dime to get in, and a nickel for candy. And but radio was a theater of the mind, and that, I think we had very sharp imaginations because of it. We were able to use our imaginations a lot more than nowadays, where everything is kind of laid out for you.
Well, Will, a lot of people listening to this will envy the fact that as you were growing up, it was the golden days of radio, and you lived in Los Angeles. You were able to go and see those performances, and I'm sure one of those you saw occasionally was probably the toughest ticket to get in Los Angeles, and that was the Lux Radio Theater.
Oh, yeah. I have a lot of those on tape.
And the fun was that it was Hollywood stars redoing their movie roles in a 1-hour format on radio, but they couldn't always be there. And I remember there was one classic one, Casablanca, where instead of Bogey and Bergman, it was Alan Ladd and Hedy Lamarr.
Yeah, they changed the cast, yeah.
And it was really interesting to hear these lines spoken by somebody else.
Yeah. Well, one that didn't work, I've got it, is Shane with Alan Ladd, because that's such a visual movie.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't work when you just say the words.
And I also heard that many of the Hollywood stars really insisted that they do 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 rehearsals, because they didn't want to mess up their lines on live radio to disappoint their fans, because when they made a movie, you could do endless retakes, but they had to get it right the first time on the Lux Radio Theater. So many of them were under a lot of pressure.
Well, they were beautifully done. But now, I told you this the other day, but I just learned this great bit of trivia. In the movie Casablanca, Jack Benny plays the role of a white-jacketed waiter, but he's not featured. It was just an inside gag with him, and he plays it straight, and you have to look real sharp. he kind of swoops. He has a swoop and a walk. But he's in about 9 different scenes, according to one guy I talked to.
I'll have to dig out Casablanca and try to find Jack Benny. One final question. When you were doing the weekly TV shows, particularly the one we remember most, and that's Sugarfoot,
Yeah.
did you have to do a lot of retakes? Were you under the gun to get it right? Were you able to ever use cue cards? How did that work?
Well, they call me 20 takes Hutchins. You know, Bogart was 1 take Bogart. But I didn't learn lines very quickly. I'm slow of study. And I was also a perfectionist, a real pain in the butt. And I wish I had my life to live over again, because I would have been a lot more philosophical. And the shows were a lot better than I thought they were. But I always wanted to do a scene one more time, and I never, if they didn't want to do it one more time, they wouldn't. And, I used to get so upset by that. And I shouldn't have, because they knew what they were doing.
I remember Cesar Romero talking about retakes once. He told me that in one of his movies, I think it was from the early 40s, he had to run down a flight of steps, and the director, whom he said he didn't like at all, made him redo it. He did it 50 or 60 times, only to find out that in the cutting room, the director used the first take.
Oh, well, you know what? William Wyler, one of the great directors, he came from Austria or Germany. English was not that easy for him. He started out, I think he started in silent days in Hollywood. And so he didn't know how to tell actors what he wanted. So he had them do it over and over again until they did it right, until they stopped acting, until they just did it. And then he made John Barrymore do a scene in Counselor at Law. I thought he should have won the Oscar for that. He was marvelous in that. He made him do it 76 times, and you watch that scene, and you can just see the pain he's going through to try to get it right. He finally got it right after 76 takes.
Wow. Will Hutchins, this has been a great hour. I'd love to stay in touch. We could probably do 3 more hours just talking about old-time radio, but thank you very much for your great work and the wonderful memories from the golden days of television.
Well, my wife says I live in the past, but that's not quite right. The past lives in me. So I'm always happy, more than happy, to go down memory lane, especially with somebody like you that knows so much about the whole thing.
Will Hutchins, thanks again for joining us from your home on Long Island.
Thank you.
And so, TV actor and all-round nice guy Will Hutchins. Join me for more interviews right here on YouTube from American Montage.